RBA Governor Philip Lowe painted a relatively optimistic view of the Australian economy just the other day, and this follows on from the decision in early in the month to hold rates steady at the record low 1.5%. These relatively upbeat assessments by the RBA and indeed the Treasury in the most recent budget have growth pushing up towards 3% over the next 1 or 2 years. And this runs counter to some of the more pessimistic talk that's circulating markets over the past couple of months in relation to Australia's very low wages growth, high levels of household debt, which do present some downside risk to the economy. And in particular, households are very much focused on these developments. So in this session, we're going to look at our own RBA policy indicator, and we're going to sort of take a bit of a dive into what's driving that in the moment. And it's pointing to a somewhat controversial hike bias at the current in the current stage of the cycle. So let's just have a look at the indicator and what's driving it. So the RBA policy indicator is the red line. It's on the right-hand scale. The cash rate is the blue, and 0 is the horizontal line, and the shaded areas are previous periods of RBA tightening. So the indicator here goes back to 1992 or actually early 1993. So the shaded areas are the periods where the RBA is hiking the official cash rate. What we do tend to find is that the red line, which is our RBA policy indicator, and we'll describe shortly what some of the components are, generally that's been above 0, as you can see here, and that's been associated with periods of tightening. It went above 0 slightly before the 2000 tightening. Once again in 2001, 2002, it moved to into slight positive territory and maintained a very high positive reading during most of 2004 through to 2007, even early 2008. Once again, moving above 0 here. That was associated with subsequent tightening. So we see the current indicator actually pushing up fairly sharply just in the most recent months. The highest reading we've seen on the RBA indicator really since about 2010, 2011. Yet, as we've seen, cash rates have been on a downtrend. In fact, have been on hold now for getting on towards 9 to 12 months. So certainly they have diverged in recent times. So we want to have a look at what's driving that actual indicator at the moment. Before we do that, let's look at the history of the record of this indicator. So if I was to look at the periods where the RBA indicator has been above 0, so that's in that sort of tightening bias we just explained, and I'm looking at monthly changes in the official cash rate, and this is since the beginning of 1992. So if we look at that, we can see that the cash rate has risen on average by 3 basis points during periods where the RBA indicator has been above 0. 14% of the time, in fact on 27 occasions, we've seen a lift in the cash rate. 152 months we've seen no change, which of course one might expect. And we have seen some periods where the cash rate has actually declined, but the average increase has been 3 basis points. Compare that to the periods where the RBA indicator is below 0. The average move in the official cash rate has been minus 11 basis points. It has never been tightened. 93 times on hold and 25 times we've seen an easing. So there's the distribution of the outcome. So it seems like a reasonable sort of indicator if we go back and look at that historically. Before we look at the underlying drivers of the recent lift in the RBA policy indicator, let's just look at its relationship with mortgage rates, for example. So there's obviously a lot more debate now about how banks are doing out-of-cycle interest rate hikes at the present time, and that shows through now. Very modest uplift in the discount rate, at the discounted home loan rate, and also a lift that occurred during 2015-16. So perhaps the relationship hasn't diverged quite as much as looking at the cash rate, given that we've seen some small moves in mortgage rates over recent times. So what is driving the RBA indicator higher? So the indicators that we use, we have 6 underlying components. There's a US ISM that captures some of the global trends, and these indicators have not been changed for at least 7 years. The employment growth indicator, so strong employment growth over a short time period, declining unemployment rate, cap use above 81.5, implied inflation expectations above 2.8, so towards the upper end of the band, and NAB business conditions above 4. They've been the indicators that we felt best were most associated with upward moves in the cash rate, and combine those together to produce an indicator. So it's giving quite a strong positive reading, as you can see here, as I noted earlier on, the highest reading we've seen really since 2010, 2011. So the only one, well there are two, but the one major factor that is not on for tightening at the moment is implied inflation expectations. We'll get to that shortly, but certainly the stronger employment growth over recent months, the decline in the unemployment rate, high levels of cap use, and we look at that and we can see historically these are the periods where the cap use indicator has been above 81.5, and that's overlaid on top of the cash rate. So that's been quite a strong one. And then NAB business conditions. So we know for quite some time that the NAB business conditions has been quite strong, up around about a reading of plus 12 at the moment, yet cash rates have been going in the opposite direction. So there has been somewhat of a breakdown. But let's have a look at the easing indicator. And we're now looking at it more on a net basis here. But the easing indicator, if you like, is that purple line there. So there's a small negative reading to that, but it's not enough. In fact, it's well and truly overwhelmed by the tightening indicators. And the only easing indicator at the moment that is on is the implied inflation expectations. We set it at 2.3% some time back. That has been maintained, that's on, and that's suggesting, if anything, the RBA would be tightening. So we're coming back then to, actually before we do, so this is the net policy indicators we saw earlier on, the bars, and you can see those being on during this period, turning off, on, off, and then it's been a bit mixed over the past 12, probably 24 months. But as we said, this is the strongest reading for some time. Now, clearly with this particular indicator, these are all equally weighted. They all have a value of 1 or 0, and what would seem to be quite clear is that policy setting has been very much geared around inflation and inflation expectations, which comes back to the discussion around low wages growth. So certainly is a reminder that domestic economic conditions are at levels that are often associated with tightening. However, there's some very good reasons and very sound reasons why the Reserve Bank just at the present time is more focused on inflation and wages, which continue to disappoint expectations. Thank you.